Digital Foundry, the boys. Those jolly old Brits, and I think one or two of them are German. I don't really know. They did a podcast. They do a podcast called DF Direct Weekly, where they talk about a bunch of stuff, but they take some viewer questions as well. And one of the questions that was asked to them with, imploring them based on their knowledge of tech was whether or not the Elder Scrolls 6 will use the Unreal Engine for rendering. And this is actually a major question right now because the Oblivion remake, remaster, whatever, uses, the way it was described is it uses Unreal Engine basically as the skin, and Creation Engine is still the bones and the flesh of the game. It's still a Creation Engine game, but the visuals and the presentation is handled through Unreal, which is a really cool hybrid thing, which I didn't even know was technically possible, but it apparently is. It's some sort of coding magic, I guess, that they figured out managing and running. And so the big question is, are they going to do the same thing with Elder Scrolls 6? Are they going to use Unreal to handle the graphical presentation to elevate what that game could look like, but then still run everything through the Creation Engine so they don't have to rewrite all of the like animation logic and tools, the questing stuff. Like they don't have to redo any of that stuff. It's an interesting question. I think the most immediate red flag is that it almost certainly would cause major problems when it comes to modding, and a lot of the stuff they built for like the Creation Club and the paid mods and stuff starts to break down, and that's a huge component of their games and the profitability of those games. So it's a major question there, but I do think it's still a valid question, and it might still be worth it for them to investigate it that way. So let's see what they say when it comes to the use of Creation Engine and Unreal. Let's check it out.
Let's move on. This question is from Scud. Hey chaps, on the topic of the Oblivion remaster, do you think this is partly a testbed for future Bethesda games? Not just remasters, but mainline new releases. I'm wondering if they're looking for a way to focus their internal Creation Engine development on improving AI physics, etc. Maybe even finding a way to more effectively stream their worlds and eliminate or minimize loading screens. If they can trust the latest version of Unreal to push new features on the graphics front, then maybe that frees them up to focus Creation Engine development time on what makes their games unique without investing massive amounts of time developing their own nanite equivalent, for example. Curious what you think, and hope you guys have a good one.
At the outset, before they answer much more intelligently than me, I will say I've spoken to some like modders who were trying to make mods for Starfield, and I asked them what the primary problem was within the Creation Engine that held Starfield back, and they described it as a problem with floats and basically how the game calculates locations and the physics for the world every time you load into a map. Again, I explained this recently, but I'll explain it here again as best I can. Again, this is not my forte, but I'll do my best. Basically, when you load into a map, if we say this canvas is the map, it sets a 0 point with coordinates, right? It has the coordinates for that location. As you get out further and further away from this, the game has to figure out where you are, and it has to figure out how that relates to the origin point. And then all of the physics and sim and everything else in the game for that scene, for that canvas, is calculated based on that. The further away from this 0 point you get, the less accurate the location becomes, just based on how it's been programmed. And it's a similar issue as when Minecraft had the far lands. So way back in the day, they had a problem in Minecraft where if you got to the edge of the world, basically 12.5 million blocks away from spawn, the simulation that like calculated how the world generates breaks because you get far enough away that the math just doesn't math anymore. And you start to get some really, really weird physics and really weird environments built because the procedural stuff just kind of breaks down. And in a very broad strokes, this is the same thing that kind of happens in the Creation Engine based on how it's been programmed, where the further away from that 0 point you get, things just stop working, which is part of the reason why Bethesda, for Starfield specifically, had to break things down into little fish bowls for you to explore instead of just giving you the entire thing to explore, which again is just interesting. But they were able to fix it for Minecraft. It just took a ton of coding and tons of overhauling, but it was technically doable. But that's where, the question of like, will using Unreal Engine in this way help Creation Engine magically fix their problems? Not necessarily. You would still have load screens between every building. You would still have load screens whenever you go even into like your own ship if it has a lot of physics sim objects in there. So it wouldn't fix that stuff. It would literally just change the like graphical presentation, and that's it. But it would still very much be constant load screens, constantly have those interruptions and things. That would still very much be there. So that's one thing I'm guessing they're going to get to, but it's a common point of discussion. It's not like this would just magically fix everything.
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Because there have been examples where developers have done exactly that. I guess the first one that springs to mind for me would be Housemarque with Returnal. You know, they took Unreal Engine and they basically, to a certain extent, made it their own. We're expecting to see similar things happening with The Witcher. I guess from my perspective, John, the question is whether this is a good move for Bethesda, because based on what I'm seeing with the Oblivion remaster, I kind of don't think it is.
So yeah, that's an interesting question, but fundamentally, you know, the Oblivion remaster is still limited by the bones of the Creation Engine, right? Everything's still segmented up into different sections. And I think that was the primary limitation with their games at this point. When you look at Starfield, I would say that the rendering really isn't a problem. They did great work in terms of overhauling the rendering side of things. The game looks beautiful. That's not an issue. But in Unreal Engine, using it in conjunction with their underlying technologies they've done in Oblivion also has not solved any of those underlying structure issues, which is why I think that is the area where they need to pour the most research for whatever comes next, is sort of finding ways to create a more seamless world that is not divided up into these little chunks. Although I will say I think Starfield was made worse by the fact that it had so many different disparate planets and areas, so it made it feel a little bit more split up than usual. It was less of an issue, I think, with the prior games where you're centralized within a single location, right? And the loading typically only occurred when moving between interiors and exteriors. But still, I would like to see if they can find a way to unify all that. I think traditionally, maybe the problem has been that the interior structures didn't necessarily match the exterior design. You know what I mean? Like the space itself does not align correctly, and they kind of designed them separately. So designing them all as a singular cohesive whole definitely would introduce some new challenges into it as well.
I think that's been part of it. Like if you have a house that's just, 20 feet by 20 feet, but then you load inside of it and it's actually laid out like it's 80 feet by 80 feet. That's definitely been a thing before, but it's kind of the chicken and the egg. Like, was it laid out that way and did they build it separately because they wanted to build it separately or because of this tech limitation? My understanding, again, based on conversations I've had with modders who are way, way, way smarter than me, is that the reason it has to be done that way is because the interiors often feature a lot of physical objects that have their own physics sim. And if you put that just into the open world and you have it seamlessly between the two, the engine can't handle all of the physics sim at the same time because the engine can't cull physics sim objects separately. It's like there's many layers of it. Again, once you get further away from the 0 point, things break down and the math on tracking objects breaks down, so you end up with physics sim on the edge of the map being different and not working properly compared to physics sim at the center of the map. There's all sorts of other things, but it's why if you play like Fallout 4, there's not a whole lot of physics sim objects while you're out exploring compared to interiors where it's just loaded with junk everywhere. They're just different. But yeah, there's many layers of this. I don't think it's a single thing that causes the issue. I think there's many different pieces to it,
in addition to managing all of the different objects and the persistence of everything. So
I guess I should be clear. Modders are not game developers, and modders made open world things without loading screens. Well, so this guy, like the guys I was speaking to specifically, had been working on a mod to try and make Starfield seamless. I think eventually there was a mod that did it that was done by other people, but it had all sorts of other difficulties. But yeah, basically they were trying to do it, but they ran into these problems, and they explained it to me with the floats and the other kind of mathematical problems with how they track physics-based objects in the world.
The way their games work does definitely create some challenges that I think most other games don't face. And even though the Unreal situation is interesting and how they were able to maintain the creation engine stuff while embracing the Unreal rendering side, it doesn't fundamentally fix the limitations, right? Plus, it's extremely freaking heavy, as we found, compared to Starfield, right? Like it hammers every platform pretty hard. So
Yeah.
Oh.
Oliver?
I'd concur with John here. I think in Oblivion it gives mixed results, where the graphics seem great to me, at least. I mean, I've only been in Oblivion.
Wait, there's something so disgusting about using a 5090 with it set to 1080p on DLSS performance, and it's still stuttering
It gives
that
mixed
bad.
results, where the graphics seem.
Oh, I realized my camera was covering it. They're using a 5090 in this clip on 1080p.
I'd concur with John
And
here.
it's
I
dipping
think
that
in
bad.
Oblivion it gives mixed results, where the graphics seem great to me, at least. I mean, I've only barely played it, but I think it seems quite terrific from everything that I've seen online. But in terms of the performance, it's really questionable. I think the console performance is in a bit of a state, and the PC performance seems very questionable. Outside of maybe like abusing frame gen and pushing that out, maybe you can get an okay experience. But in general, it does not seem to operate very well, especially on lower end CPUs. And Starfield is already, like John said, it's already a good looking game. And don't expect this is stasis for the creation engine either. They're going to push that engine further, I'm sure, for Elder Scrolls 6, presuming they do stick with creation engine for the rendering side of things. And I'm sure that if they went for Unreal, that, who knows, 5-year wait, 6-year, 7-year wait for Elder Scrolls 6 will be an even longer wait. So,
Right.
because that involves some adaptation and hiring more engineers and, doing a whole different process there. So I don't really know why they would need to switch. I think when you look at Starfield, it's a pretty good looking game. We had very positive things to say about it. Performance, I mean, it's not amazing in like Aquila or Jemison, New Atlantis, these places, but certainly in general, it's a much better performer than everything that I've seen from the Oblivion remake, and I think that's a positive thing.
I will give them credit, and I said this in my review of Starfield back in the day, a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was. Starfield is far and away the best performing Bethesda project they've ever put out. Like it runs way better than Fallout did at launch. Fallout 4, I mean, Fallout 3 did at launch, than Skyrim at launch, certainly than Fallout 76. It runs very well. They definitely made it the most polished game they had ever put out. It's not saying a whole lot, frankly, but still, I think they deserve that credit. I think graphically, Starfield's not, I wouldn't say it's bad, but I also wouldn't say it's like graphically impressive. I'd say it's like decent to me. And that's mainly in comparison to other open world, like other AAA, industry leading open world adventure games. Even you compare it to something like Cyberpunk 2077, which came out 3 years prior, granted 3 years prior broken, but even if you compare it to the 1 year anniversary version that had been fixed up a lot, or the 2 year anniversary, the 1.4 edition or whatever, I still think that Cyberpunk's, animation quality, the graphics quality, the ray tracing stuff they were doing, all of that graphically is way, way more impressive. But then again, like we said earlier, comparison is the thief of joy. So maybe we shouldn't even bother doing that, but still serviceable. Yeah. Serviceable. A good word. I mean, that's fair.
And, I mean, again, I'm seeing no objections to the way that Starfield looks. I think it looks pretty great, actually.
Okay.
I think the odds of them using this like nested technique for rendering the graphics through Unreal, but running the game through Creation Engine, the odds of that being the case are pretty low. I also think like there will be the comparisons that they would be frustrated by are like the constant load screens, and those are going to happen regardless, because it's not going to change even if they render through Unreal and simulate and do all of the game logic stuff through Creation Engine. All of that stuff still would remain. But I do think by its very nature, it will be harder to notice the constant load screen issue, I guess, if they are looking at, an Elder Scrolls game. I just think it's different. The reason why it was so painfully obvious with Starfield is because the way they had it set up was you're on X planet in the city, and you want to fly to the other planet where your quest objective is. It means if you haven't discovered that planet yet, you have to fast travel to your ship. That's a load screen. Then you fast travel into the cockpit. That's a load screen. And then you select where you're going to fly to. That's a load screen. You go into the orbit of the planet. And then you fast travel down onto the planet's surface. That's a load screen. And then you have to like basically load into the actual planet's surface from the cockpit. That's another load screen. And then you run to the quest objective, which might be in a cave or something. And then you load into that. So just like going from point A to point B in Fallout 4 or Elder Scrolls 6, maybe you start the quest inside the castle, you load out into the open world, you run to the location, and then you walk into the building. So you effectively had one load screen, run, two load screens. For the Starfield example of going point A to point B, you're dealing with like 6, 7, 8 load screens in the span of like a minute and a half, maybe. Probably even faster. So it's way more jarring, way more disruptive to the flow of gameplay. And I think that's just frankly what they didn't anticipate, was just how disruptive that could be. And it might have been that they had been working on the game for so long, they've been playing it so long in the office, that they just got used to it and they didn't realize how jarring it would be for new players. I think that that's likely part of why it kind of took them by surprise, but you can't fix it. I mean, it's just a problem. Even the mods that try to make the game seamless, it's like the ship to the planet surface is seamless, but still you're fast traveling every time you load into a new fishbowl, every time you go to a new planet, of course, like all of that still happens. So it, it doesn't change things. But I think in the context of a game like Elder Scrolls 6, it will be less noticeable, just like it was less noticeable in Fallout 4 because of just how the game was set up and how it was presented to players. So I actually think it will be less noticeable and not as big of a deal, the load screen issue. I think just by its very nature of how they set up Starfield, it was very jarring. It could still be jarring here if they design the game in some stupid ways. For example, one of the things I think they're going to do with the game being set on the coast, I think the odds are pretty high that they copy and paste over Starfield's like ship mechanic, and they give you the option of having a ship to go along the coast to fast travel to different ports. And maybe they even have like a little simulation thing where it's like, oh, you trade goods at these ports and you collect goods in the north and then you trade them at a port in the south. They do stuff like that, and with like ship customization, things like that. Maybe like little piracy mini games, something like that. But then I think the odds are pretty high. If they do that, they try to tie that into the core gameplay loop, and they probably encourage you to like use your ship to navigate the world. And if you do that, I could see, oh, you're in the belly of the ship. You have to load into the deck, and then you have to load from the deck to the captain's nest, into the captain's quarters, where you go to the map, you select the fast travel location, and then you see a little scene of the ship sailing into the distance, load screen, and then you appear over here, because I don't think it's going to travel in real time. I highly doubt it. So you're going to then pop out over here, and then you walk back out of the captain's quarters, you load onto the deck, and then you have to select dock the boat, and then you load onto that, and then you're free to explore. I think if they set it up that way, we will make fun of it. Just being honest. Just being honest. We're going to poke fun if that's how it is. Okay. But if they are aware that this is something that's memeable and people will poke fun at because it's just easy pickings, they should set it up differently. I think, frankly, as much as I love the idea of a ship, if you can't do it well, you shouldn't do it at all. And I think if your ship is going to basically just be like a little capsule that looks like a ship, but is actually just a load screen POI, basically, that you just go to load into a different area, don't do it. Cut the ship. Cut the ship. Cut that ship out. If you can't do it well, don't do it at all. If they can do it well, and it's like, oh, you have a ship, you can customize it, it's really cool, and then you can sail it along the coast, and then, just like in a Black Flag or something, you just drop the anchor right here, hop off, and go explore. That could be super cool. And then you travel back, you load all of your stash onto your ship, and then you can send it to a different port in a different city, and then you keep exploring and you meet it back in that port. That sounds cool to me. I'm all in for that. That sounds cool. But if it doesn't work like that, I'll be bummed. And I think we'll throw fits if it plays stupid. But maybe they don't even do a ship. Maybe they just fully cut that out. There's rumors and speculation that they're going to be doing basically a castle building thing. Some people have even assumed that that's what this is. It's a little nod to that, where they're going to give you relatively early in the game access to a castle that's old and dilapidated, that's pretty central in the game. Similar to a settlement in like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Shadows. And they give you the settlement, and then you can build it up using the same fort building systems they had for Fallout 4 and also for Starfield. and they allow you to build up your own little castle and fill it with, you know, your own followers, and they can maybe farm some of the land surrounding it and do things like that to add some sim elements to it, which sounds interesting and cool. And if that's where the focus goes and they cut out the ship stuff, that might be a better option. But all of this to say, I mean, my understanding of the actual limitations of the creation engine and the primary frustration being those constant load screens, the Unreal thing would not magically fix that. It just wouldn't. So I don't think that is a solution. And if it means that they'd have to use that and then the performance is god awful, I'd rather have decent performance like we had with Starfield, but the game just doesn't look quite as good as it possibly could. I'd rather that than it looks a little bit better, but it still has constant load screens and it runs like ass. So I'll take that. I think the overwhelming odds are that they just stick to Creation Engine 2. They don't get too tricky with it. There will be comparison videos. There will be side-by-side comparisons where look at the Oblivion remaster compared to the version from Bethesda. Look how much worse it is. There's going to be those comparisons, but I don't think there's any real way out of that at this point. It just is what it is. Might not matter, but still. Liquid says they just have to make it moddable and modders will make good textures and graphics for it. And I mean, it's funny to say, but I do think that is something they are very aware of, that modders are a huge component of this. And if they don't have good modders or good modding, what's the word I'm looking for? Compatibility, things go bad. I think they need the mods. So we'll see. But I think more than likely they just stick to Creation Engine.
He took my thing. Red flag.